Maybe to kick things off, Sheila, I'll work down the line here, but quick intro, a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into the meat of things.
Sheila Klarity, always been in enterprise software. Proudest moment was leading Klarity's Series A.
Okay. Julian Rose, global early stage investor, investing across the entire software and technology stack, and also a lot of kind of AI applications now across financial services, healthcare, and broadly enterprise use cases.
I'm Michael Gordon, happily unemployed. I was for almost 10 years at MongoDB, where I was the COO and CFO from 40 million in revenue to 2 billion in revenue. Took the company public with the team. Just stepped down earlier this year, but also do boards, public, private, nonprofit on the board, just because Andrew mentioned of UiPath, where I'm the audit committee chair.
Good stuff. Promise we want to be an exciting panel, so this is not just going to be a bunch of bland, boring questions, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. But maybe to kick things off from a macro level, right? We've talked a lot today on AI disruption, on expectations, right? Kind of the shift from experimentation to ROI expectation. I'd be interested, two venture capitalists and a CFO, COO, what have you guys seen with some of the boards you're sitting on, with some of the customers and portfolio companies you're advising? What has this AI wave looked like? What changes are you seeing, especially in the last 12 to 18 months? Sheila, let's start with you.
Sure. I'd say the capability, when you really think as finance people in this room, right? The capability to divorce revenue growth from cost growth is a phenomenal moment in time for us. And so we're seeing that across a lot of our portfolio companies. From, for example, our software teams, right? When you start these companies, you've got a couple coders in a room, and they're building, and their productivity is night and day different from what we used to see. We see the capability of individual and small teams to build product deeper, faster, more product than we've ever seen in the past. Then as these companies scale and look more like all of the companies that you all represent, the ability to say, okay, I'm going to drive growth in revenue, right, through optimization of processes that really, really touch revenue, while keeping my costs, let's just say, relatively flat. And how are they doing that, right? And so this is the board's conversation to say, what should the structure of the P&L, what should the structure of our organization look like? Well, when you see these things, and you see this Kaizen team, or however you want to phrase it, right? A lot of the historical phraseology from an AI perspective has been, gosh, we do agentic things, right? So we have these agentic analyst, advisor relationships that are working across the enterprise. And that's obviously something that's on the tip of everyone's tongue as you think about AI these days. But then you also hear a lot about co-piloting, and I love the coach, right? So how do we bring some of this intelligence to each individual? What part of my job should actually be agentically enabled, and what part of my job as an employee of the company should be helping me to be better, bigger, stronger, and more productive? And then in the CFO's office, how do we measure all of that? How do we make sure we're putting our initiatives towards the right things that are actually allowing for this greater productivity of all of our team, but also then we're seeing it in top line growth, operating expenses not growing, and just the bottom line completely changing. And so I think today that it's incumbent for us to all ask ourselves those questions for the organization.
I just fully agree with everything Sheila said. I think something interesting in the evolution that we have seen as an early stage investor working with technology startups and selling into large enterprises was definitely 24 months ago when AI was coming a little bit more kind of top of mind to everybody. It was a bit this kind of trial and error initiative of we have to be defensive in the way of we have to show we are doing something. I had a lot of startups who 50 companies showing me the same enterprise logos as their initial pilot customers, because a lot of large enterprises, they tried 30, 40, 50 solutions for kind of the same use cases. There was always the hope, a little bit like magic in a box. I want to see kind of an efficient, imminent improvement in my revenue, in my cost, in my bottom line. But it wasn't really as much drilled down in what are the underlying drivers. So taking a bit like a DuPont view to your business. So what does really change in my company if I deploy solution A, B, C? You didn't get the operational buy-in of the teams actually working with kind of technology. I think a lot of people believed in customer service, very obvious, pick up a phone, take a customer's call, reply to an email, automate this. Kind of with AI, I think Klarna was a great use case. They went out and kind of announced they're like shutting down like half the team, but they went very quickly into it without clear KPIs, without working with operating teams, without kind of like going through like feedback loops, and realized they went too quickly, the quality wasn't there, the customer satisfaction wasn't tracked, the right KPIs weren't set, and now they had to take a step back. While other companies, I think Salesforce may be a good example, who like a couple of days ago announced now they're going down from 9,000 to like 4,000 people in like their customer success. They went through like a very long kind of planning period. You try out different tools, you measure kind of like very specific KPIs, you work with the operational teams, and you try to actually understand the business drivers that you can change in your day-to-day to AI. That AI is not just a magic wand, but AI is an enabler of things that you already do today. But I think this change, both from boards that we sit on like larger scale companies, but also like startups selling into these big businesses, to really drill down 2, 3, 4 levels deeper, understand the existing processes, define clear KPIs, and then bring today's business into a better spot instead of just hoping there's a magic wand. I think it's probably one of the biggest shifts we've seen in the last 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, I would just add, and I talked to a bunch of executives, board members, investors, founders, CFOs, and if I think across all the different boardroom conversations that either I'm in or have visibility into, I would say there's a fairly clear hierarchy of the thought process, right? The first question is this affect our competitive position overall, right? Like, what does that mean for our product? Are we a clear, AI winner? Maybe you're an insurgent and you're AI native, and that's great. And so obviously it's very easy in that scenario. Many people don't fall into that scenario though, and so they're trying to figure out, what do I need to be doing? Some of the boards are putting pressure on it. Some investors, especially if they're public companies, may be trying to figure out, are they an AI, beneficiary, or are they roadkill? And the market may be, out to judge, and so they're trying to figure out like, what do we do? And so I think the first thing that people are focused on, what do we need to be doing from a product standpoint in order to deliver, benefits, to our customers. Secondly, what I see people then moving to is, okay, how can I use it to improve my customer interactions, right? The customer experience. How can I leverage things? And that's, adjacent to and sort of part of the overall experience, but not specifically in the product, right? So maybe the way that I interact with customer service or technical support or some of those teams, I think comes up. And then third is obviously the internal processes. And depending on where companies are from an evolutionary standpoint, and where they are in terms of like a market ecosystem, those 3 different flavors will be relevant in different proportions to people. The other thing that I'd say, and not to like overly complicate it, because like I know everyone's excited about thinking about 2x2 matrices, but I'm going to throw 2x3 at you. But looking at the crowd, knowing a couple of years, I think you can handle it. If you've got those 3 things, right, the sort of product, customer experience, and internal processes, I think the other axis that you want to think about, to really oversimplify it, but as a numbers guy, I think in the end it has to show up somewhere, is either you're doing it for revenue or you're doing it for cost. Right, and just being really clear about what actually am I trying to do. And a lot of the boards will be putting pressure on people, like, we need to be doing something AI, and word comes down and trickles down to the teams, and people are trying to frantically think of something and throw some sort of marketing dust at it. But really, I think where you're going to get the benefits and increase the odds of success is if you have a very clear hypothesis around what you're trying to do, how the technology can help you achieve that. And then go about executing against it.
Michael, maybe sticking with you with what you just said, where does risk factor in there as well, with you being the AC chair at
Yeah, so risk is sort of like an underlying framework that cuts across all of it, and I think that risk, like anything, could be a double-edged sword. I think maybe the easiest way to share just my view on risk is, it's not risk elimination or risk minimization, right? We're in the business of risk management, right? So you have to be thinking about what is the relative value that I'm getting relative to the risk that I am taking. Also, I think often in these conversations, and often CFOs maybe inappropriately get a bad rap of thinking about risk only as a negative, but there are ways to leverage technology to remove risk, right, to the positive, right? One of the things that you can think about, if it's an internal process, is maybe the automation is going to be higher quality. It might also be lower cost, right? So I might get 2 benefits. But really thinking about, risk in all its flavors and facets. I do think that risk cuts across it, though, and at least from some of the situations I've seen, Some of the risk-related concerns, whether they be cyber, privacy, all sorts of other things, wind up being blockers. And so I would strongly encourage people to get ahead of those things if you really want to be able to put something in place and to have it have impact across the enterprise. You need, this is kind of truly a team sport. You need to be partnered with folks in technology, with in IT, in cyber, in the other teams, because that's ultimately the only way you're going to be effective.
Just to add on to that, I deeply agree with what you said. There's a huge risk in not trying AI these days. And there's a parallelization that you can do because of the efficiency and the ability to go proof of concept and drive these things in your organization. And so I encourage people to think about, okay, might I just go try this out as a parallel process to the process that I'm running today? And I encourage people to think about, the overall shape of your P&L. We talk to CIOs and they're like, okay, well, first of all, 65% of my budget goes to this tech debt stuff that I've been paying off for years. As a CFO, you get to come in and say, not anymore, right? The shape of these technologies has changed in a way that allows you to actually move forward. You have disparate data sources. We have MCP, that connects into everything. There's an answer these days for the issues that heretofore have made these projects impossible. And I encourage everyone in finance to really think about pushing all the parts of the organization to explore that.
Maybe, Sheila, sticking with you and Julian here from a VC lens, right? There's a lot of discussion out there in the public markets on revenue per employee, right? AI-enabled cost ratios really driving exponential results for companies. When you guys are looking at investments, how do you think about that? With AI transformation, I know Andrew initially said transformation is dead, but that AI-enabled push to really help drive that exponential impact, how does that inform kind of your investment thesis or where you're allocating capital?
Yeah, I think, look, there's, especially in private companies as well, there's a lot of benchmarks, charts flying around with ARR per employee and how also how quickly some of these companies have been scaling with very small teams to generate massive amounts of revenue. I think we're always trying to take a bit of a kind of balanced approach, because in the end, some of these software companies that are very AI native these days, they kind of scale a little bit like consumer companies, right? They kind of enable businesses to adopt their technologies very quickly. The barriers are really low. There's a lot of open-mindedness to try even different solutions. I think for us in the end, beyond the kind of sheer amount of revenue per employee, in the end it will also matter how sticky is the revenue, how kind of predictable is kind of future upsell, how defensible are these kind of contracts. And I think similarly when we kind of look at the counter lens, when I'm a startup, I'm selling, obviously want to grow fast, but how do I build these kind of relationships? If I'm the buyer persona, I'm a CFO at a large public company in kind of enterprise, and I work with these early startups, you have to balance kind of a little bit what Michael mentioned on the risk side on the one hand, on the other hand, the absolute amount of impact, if it's getting revenue up or cost down, but also the time to value, because for a lot of initiatives, you might optimize for really quick wins. So you sign up a couple of solutions, you have the next AI chatbot, the next AI call center that reduces your cost imminently, but you don't know as much the long-term impact. While if you transformationally change how your product team builds kind of product pipelines in a more advanced way, how you build more comprehensive infrastructures, how you distribute kind of product in a different way, you might not see that tomorrow, but those are investments that you will see in 6 to 12 months. So I think while it's nice to increase revenue per employee really quickly, I think you want to think about defensibility, but you also want to invest still in the right long-term ROI projects in similar matters.
I agree with that. The only thing I would add is, as you look at these smaller teams today, again, it's this productivity lens. Their job is to write code at the beginning. They can write incredible amounts of code efficiently these days, right? But then that code often does go into an enterprise in what we call a product-led growth motion, a PLG motion these days. So individuals in your companies are like, let me try this out, let me see how this works. And often those curves do kind of crazy adoption and then come down the other side. The companies that are doing the best are really going deep with customers. They're listening to where customer value accrues, where that changes across the organization. How does this become a tool that's used by many in an organization? When Nishal's up here talking about a coaching tool that is a one-on-one coaching relationship for your employees where they can actually get information and have that for themselves and learn and actually have that in a secure, safe, and private way, the entire organization wants to use that. right? So looking at what people would opt into and choose to use to change the way that they work. Everybody's interested in AI. A lot of people will, people are always asking venture capitalists, they're like, what should I do with it? How should I learn for it? The phraseology, you won't lose your job to AI, but you might lose your job to someone who's better at using AI to do your job than you. It's quite a popular phrase these days for a good reason, right? So helping people to understand what that looks like with solutions that really do go deep with individuals across your organization, that's something that we love seeing for companies that we're backing.
You brought up earlier, the concept of POCs. I think my team probably shudders because I've told them we don't do POCs, we do POVs. It's no longer a concept, it's a proof of value. But I'd be interested as you guys dig in, right? Because I agree with a lot of what you've just said, right? We've had that wave of customer experience and transcription of call logs and next best action recommendations. We've seen massive drops in kind of R&D spend, to your point, with a lot of that kind of mid-level management on the coding side. I think now that the LLMs and just the functional know-how within finance is finally coming around, right? The G&A perspective, the reduction of the costs, Michael, you talked a little bit on that too. How do you guys factor that in when you do step into a POC or a POV? At what point are you comfortable actually turning on the gas to take that company-wide? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times, some of these decisions really, you have to think about sort of board versus management. Like some of the day-to-day decisions really should be driven by management, as opposed to the board. The boards want to be pushing and probing to make sure that they understand, are we being aggressive enough? Are we thinking about things? Obviously, there's also the risk component, as we already outlined. But one of the things that I feel like I've been seeing is people who are getting frustrated or at the risk of getting frustrated, and a number of people who feel like, yes, it's transformed a number of things, coding very easily, as a prime example. But a lot of other people feel like they're sort of approaching this sort of state of fatigue. And one of the things that I've seen increasingly, which I think is a great sign, is finance leaders really sort of saying, let me show you, how we can do it, where we can take a lead on this. I was saying this to someone else the other day, but having had to approve a lot of software over the years, it always seemed like there was an enormous amount of innovation in like the marketing technology stack, right? Like the MarTech stack, and there's always some new tool and something leapfrog something else, and why are we buying that? I thought we already had a thing to do. Oh no, this is the newfangled thing. And yet like sort of the CFO tech stack has been virtually unchanged, right? For like a very, very long time. And all of a sudden there's been this sort of proliferation leveraging AI of new tools and technologies that people can leverage to really, allow the finance folks to lead by example. And so I was talking to one company that has sort of a broader push, across thousands of employees to try and drive, how are we going to have practical uses of AI as a technology that's going to either drive revenue or reduce costs. And the finance team was some absurdly high percentage of the ideas, sort of in the suggestion and prioritization box, because you see the operations, you cut across the business, you've got the right, hopefully, incentives, you care about driving revenue, not just taking out costs, but you can be kind of deliberate about which we need to do which. And I think there's really an opportunity, and that's what I feel like I'm seeing more and more is actually some of the most interesting things happening in maybe what someone historically might have called like the back office. Obviously, there are a bunch of great customer-facing applications, and those hopefully are going to continue to succeed and drive growth. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for people in the room really to be sort of setting an example within their companies, within their leadership teams, and to demonstrate ultimately to their boards, how to leverage technology in order to continue to scale the company cost effectively.
So the back office is now the front office.
Exactly.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. I was going to say, that might be the kindest articulation of, hey, go-to-market teams ask for a lot. that I've ever heard. Sheila, Julian, like red flags that creep in scenarios like that, though, right? So if you're doing POCs, right, you're aligning the teams, you're getting those rolling. What are you looking for as those leading indicators? Okay, we can move this forward, or hey, let's cut bait and pivot priority.
I think finance leadership is so helpful in these situations because you actually know what you're looking for. You're good at measuring things. You're not saying every proof of concept is successful. It's not, right? And so what actually is delivering value immediately? And the nice thing right now is, as you evaluate competitors, as all of us should when we think about these solutions, there's competitors that will come in and say it's going to be 6 weeks to get you a proposal on what we're going to do. Sure, we're a consultancy firm, that's going to be, $1.5 million. There's another firm that comes in and says, hey, we can define this, and sure, that will take, a couple of days, and we can show that to you, and we can not only take that process, we can run it for the year, whatever your time period is. We can change as your organization changes, and we can do all of that for a fraction of what the other firm is quoting you. And I think that these things are very, very measurable. The impact when AI is used well is kind of gobsmacking in terms of the financial return, in terms of the efficiency, in terms of the employee experience of it. And all of these things together really change your organization. One of the other things we're seeing, so we talked about agentic opportunities, we talked about co-piloting and improving our employees. The other thing that we're seeing is that teams function better together as we thread AI through people, right? So we better understand what is the workload. We better understand, oh, Sheila ran that analysis yesterday. Do you want to start from where she left off? We better understand how to put the pieces together of teaming, leveraging and using these technologies to do that. So I think that's another area where finance can take the leadership and say, wow, this is more efficient, right? We often talk about the work to do work, percentage of the organization that's thinking about that, and reducing or eliminating that to a large extent is a big financial delta for organizations as well.
And maybe just to add one thing, I think fully agree with the measurability and the helpfulness of the finance org and kind of like supporting these like POCs or like POVs. I think one of the questions that we hear the most, which I think is fairly interesting, is actually how do you know that the kind of KPIs you define for a POC, for a POV, that the players you're looking at actually kind of the right subset of like opportunities for a specific use case. I think ChatGPT, OpenAI brought probably like I think 14 or 15 updates in the last year alone. There's like so many new companies that are, as we said before, they're growing at like hyper speed. So if I actually define a POC and I want to optimize for maybe company A does it in 6 months, somebody else in 2 months with like cheaper cost and better outcomes, how do I know tomorrow there will not be 3 other kind of companies like popping up that do it even faster, they do it even cheaper, they do it even better, because the innovation cycles are just so quick. So it's something that we see with early stage companies, that while it can be clearly defined what success looks like and people are able to kind of compare 2, 3, 4 options available, there's sometimes still the question like, do I really want to commit? Like in the ERP space, there's been like a lot of innovation on the early stage sides and next gen ERP and native ERPs, raising a ton of money, growing fast. But then when you talk to the underlying customers, they're always running in parallel because nobody knows what is the next solution that's coming out there. So I think it's an interesting question, while to define clear KPIs and measurable kind of time to integration, time to value, and cost and financial impacts, how do you know what else might be coming out with innovation cycles that are so super fast, to not overcommit too quickly?
I think maybe just one thing on that I think is maybe helpful is, as finance leaders, is one of the most precious resources is just the scarcity of time, right, and resources. And so I think as you think about prioritizing projects, obviously spending the time up front doesn't have to be, 6 weeks and $1.5 million, right? But like spending the time to say, okay, what would we need to believe, right? Just you can, in a very simple like spreadsheet exercise, you can say our hypothesis is we're going to make this change and it's going to increase cross-sell, upsell rates, or drive revenue, or whatever it is, right? You can fairly quickly have a point of view of like, okay, how much is it going to do that by? What's the impact of that going to be? And then importantly, go to the owner of that metric, right? There's someone who runs the renewals team, and like that's what you're talking about. And sanity check with them, do they really think that they can get 2 points, 5 points, whatever it is? Because I don't think there's a ton of sense in testing things that you don't have buy-in, testing things that you don't understand what you're looking for. And because there's so many opportunities out there, I think it's very valuable for you as finance leaders and partners to sort of help creating the frameworks to say, okay, these are going to be the highest value things, or the things that we think are sort of, the best return relative to a portfolio of things that we can do. And again, we were talking about POCs or POVs. I think it shouldn't just be, sales ops wants to go do X. That's great, but provide some organizing framework to think about, well, IT has a project over here, and somehow the GC office has an idea about contracting and time to close, or whatever it is, right? And help create sort of a unifying framework to think about, okay, how do we allocate sort of time, dollars, and everything else to increase the odds of success?
How, Michael, maybe from your view at Mongo, right, where you had the dual role, both CFO and COO, right? So you're looking at things through the finance lens, but you're looking at through the day-to-day operation lens as well. How are you balancing that? Sheila, you kind of alluded to that, of this harmonized view where, end of the day, finance is the love language of a business, right? But getting everybody to the table, seeing that mission statement to go forward through their own respective lens. How did you guys think about that when you were implementing it at Mongo? Yeah,
a few thoughts. So one, I wore a lot of hats and had to call out which hat was making which comment, and I sometimes
we've got a lot of hats.
Contradicted or argued with myself, which I did anyway, and I was just able to do with a bunch of other people as well. So I think it's just being really clear about what the objectives are. Like, to me, that's the most important thing, and sort of understanding why are we doing this, and like what is our hypothesis going in. Doesn't mean that you'll be right, but I think having that sort of clearly articulated set of objectives, right? They're business objectives, those could be paired with financial objectives, and then just being really specific, whether it's from a financial standpoint or an operating standpoint, what it is that we wanted to do. The other thing that I'd say for sort of the finance leaders in the crowd is, I think it's really important to be thinking about growing the business first. It's obviously easiest to think about how to cut costs, and that may feel comfortable or closer to home or more within your control, all of which are super wonderful, excellent places to live. But you'll be most valuable as a partner to the CEO and the executive team and the board in the context of this panel if you're really sort of thinking about the business first and growing the business first. And yes, you may need to be the one who's most aware of the cost or most dimensionalizes the cost or is most fluent in the risks and the negative side of the business. But that doesn't mean that needs to taint your approach to everything. And so even if you don't wear a COO hat or have operationally oriented functions, over the years that I've done this job, the best CFOs that I've seen have always been real partners of the business, and they're aware, but they're more likely to say yes but or yes and, not no no no, right? And trying to find, they understand the context, they have a shared set of objectives. If there's conflict, they're driving alignment across the team to say, okay, what are we really trying to achieve and how do we prioritize it? But then finding ways to sort of get things done.
So deeply agree with this. I think this is the number one mistake we see from an enterprise perspective, that people think of AI as efficiency and therefore just sort of below the revenue line. It's not. And DoorDash will talk more about it later, but the opportunity to optimize revenue and top line, leveraging and using AI, is the thing that most people come to second, right? They do efficiency first and then they do top line second. And switch that around and the business will love you.
Yes, well, and my guess is many of you, are in recurring revenue model businesses, and I probably don't have to explain to you how very small differences in your retention rates, right, or your expansion rates have dramatically outsized impacts and meaningfully dwarf anything you can do on the cost-saving side, if you can get to something you believe and that your executive team will kind of sign up for, right? Just to stuff someone with a number they don't believe isn't super helpful. But if you can get there, the upside from those things is dramatically, superior.
And the same parallel of where you're seeing software be built faster is coming to businesses being built faster, right? So start thinking with that mindset.
Yeah, great recommendations. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we've got plenty of time to take some questions from the audience as well. So if we've got the mic runners in the back, Karn, excellent. Any questions? In the back here.
I have a question for you, Taylor. Have you found in some of your AI projects, in situations where the company has different people across different locations, doesn't necessarily have to be international, performing the same process, but as you know, in a different way, right? Not everybody performs the same process the same way. And that you find that you really almost have to do a process standardization projects, sort of sub-project first before you can move on to the AI? I'm interested about how you handle that.
We actually do the inverse, right? So we actually use it as a way to actually flag where those gaps and variations are occurring. I spent my background. I was at SAP for 10 years, so all of the talk around ERP transformation and those design thinking workshops where you got sticky notes to hell and back and a 30-slide deck no one can operationalize 6 months later. I lived that for a long time, right? I think we actually use it. If you're waiting for your data to be perfect to actually tackle an agenda, you're going to be waiting till the end of time, right? People have been trying to do master data cleanup for 50 plus years now. So I would actually encourage you to look at it of, can we actually leverage AI to quickly compress all of that phase 0 work to really understand where are the variations so that okay, here are the key areas to go unpack. I think DoorDash can speak to that. Initially talked about one of our real estate companies out of Chicago. You can probably ascertain who that is. They used it for the exact same way on cash application processes across 80 different global countries, right? Look very, very different kind of theater by theater.
Put another way, if you've seen one SAP system, you've seen one SAP system, right?
True.
And so we don't have to worry about that anymore, right? So don't pay down the tech debt. Don't go standardize. Don't move all the data to one place. Just get going with the AI. That's the opportunity.
So the message is don't re-engineer, pick your best and move along.
Not even pick your best. Let the flowers bloom and manage them, having the system and the artificial intelligence use the logic that can then go customized to each of those environments, geographies, whatever it looks like. Don't worry about it.
The one thing I'll add to that too, I know we've got a pretty heavy finance audience in this room, but we're seeing quite an emergence of process excellence teams that are leaning into what we're doing, right? So those Lean Six Sigma kind of black belt teams, right, where they're under the gun right now too, right? AI is threatening what they do day to day, right? And the timelines to carry out those projects, those 3-5 year timelines on ERP transformations are getting squeezed unlike any time before, right? So those OE teams are also looking, hey, where can we use AI to get an advantage to tackle more big projects, more transformations within a fiscal year to actually justify and warrant why they are valuable, right? What they're unlocking.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Right up front here, Michael, can you?
Thank you. Maybe a question for Taylor. You're talking about POCs, and I have to imagine your team is stretched unbelievably thin, just doing tons of POCs.
Yep.
What signals are you seeing that's leading to conversion? And maybe share some of that with us, because there's lots of interest, lots of people want to test, but then it's actually adoption and
I'm gonna have to slip you $100 bill under the table right later today. I am ruthless with my team, right? I feel for everybody in this room too, right? You're getting pounded by sales teams unlike ever before, right? So cutting through the noise on, hey, what's real versus what's just an empty promise is a hard part. I make sure, like, we will absolutely put our best foot forward. We'll make investments and proofs. But we want to make sure a couple things. Number one, the problem statement is clearly articulated. The success criteria of what are we even proving? What do you want to see? Is it just technical feasibility that, yes, we can tackle the plumbing of your data estate and what we're going to go do? Is it simply technical justification? Is it a business case validation where we're going to go build that together and there's labor efficiencies and employee experience and working capital benefits, et cetera, right? So for us, we really look at a couple key things. One, let's get it really dialed into a value chain that we can define, right? Let's make sure we've got that executive sponsorship behind it. What are we actually solving for, right? And then ultimately, what is that success criteria? And if you don't have that understood, that's fine. We'll still engage, but we want to make sure that that's out on the table so that both parties are eyes wide open entering into those POVs. You guys are supposed to be asking the board members questions rather than me. So.
Can you give an example of how it's being utilized for controls improvement? Because that's one of the CFO functions, and we hear about efficiency, like transaction processing, etc. But if you can talk about like just the controls, especially like in the pharma sector, gross to net, for example, there are lots of complex rules that need to get applied, and that's the justification is given for like having large headcount in that department, right?
You want me to take that one? I think the most common is like the SOX narrative play, right? So while we don't necessarily want to go down the avenue of test to design, test of operational effectiveness, right? What we do help a lot of those kind of GRC teams that have their risk control matrix understand is just getting things out of people's heads and actually into a system where it can be captured, right? So it's really used as an accelerant, right, to get kind of what Nishal had showed earlier, right? The analyst component of existing artifacts, videos, kind of that knowledge transfer out of the heads of the individuals into kind of an aggregated worldview, so that you can start to poke holes where you see material weakness.
Yeah, I would have said documentation, it's kind of first draft, if you think about the Gen AI aspect, first draft of documentation and processes, and then especially in the GRC world, the sense of like we have all these different processes, where can we reduce overlap, how can we get greater efficiencies, reduce the burden on the teams that are providing inputs into them. I think those are probably the two areas in that controls world. I think the other thing that we should probably be super explicit about, because I worry that people like mix and blur terminology, but I think people talk about AI. A lot of that is in the context of generative AI, which is sort of newer, but for like a very specific set of use cases that's different from maybe classic or traditional AI, which in my mind is just like a fancier term for a bunch of automations, right? And just being really clear about sort of the probabilistic nature of Gen AI versus sort of the deterministic nature of automations, and being really clear like which is good for which type of use case, because those are very different kinds of things, and being really specific and deliberate about that, I think will increase the odds of success.
Got time for one more?
Thanks. I would love to hear your view on the board's role in terms of the pace of AI adoption across the organization, and kind of where board's playing today outside of just understanding and assessing the risks, and do you see a shift happening at some point in time in terms of the board pushing for adoption in a different way?
It's one of the things we spend a lot of time on with boards today is how do you work with companies that ride on top of a lot of the foundational improvements that you're seeing from an AI perspective? So people are saying, okay, I'm seeing billions upon billions of dollars go into these large models, the training, the talent, the chips, right? All of these elements. How do I make sure that the software companies or the AI companies that I'm working with are actually riding on top of all of that innovation? I think that's an important thing that boards can look at kind of in a pan-company way. I'd say the ability for organizations to see real change. One of the things that was demoed very, very, very clearly by Nishal, but is like a big deal, is the shift to multimodality. So when they're collecting information with a screen grab, that's video. When they're interviewing you, that's a voice AI. When you're typing things in and describing these processes, when you're inputting documents, right? There's images that are going into that, all of these things. You want to make sure that, and multimodality is one of the new trends of AI. It's important because humans experience the world in a very multimodal way. So it's a great way for AI to experience the world now as well, and be able to deepen their capability from a business process perspective. And I think boards have to continually look at, okay, what's happening in the world of AI, what's applicable and the opportunity for our business, and how are we getting the best out of the world's investments in this, but then working with companies that are sitting on top of that and really leveraging that and benefiting from that. And when a new model comes out, it's an interesting thing. Sometimes when I work in San Francisco, I often just work out of a conference room that Nishal's working in, right? This is like a benefit that you get from being an investor. And every time a new model drops, their team has used it that day. And it's fascinating, right? Because there's nothing that comes out, there's nothing that happens that the team hasn't used and seen and worked with. And that's what you want to be seeing as a board.
I mean, just one thing to add in the interest of time, but I think beyond all of it, like really just ensure that the management team like has a kind of appreciation of the one importance for their business. I mean, every business is different, right? And it's easy to kind of throw the next coding tool, the next kind of go-to-market tool, and so on in the org, or like just outsource it into like a head of AI function and try different tools. But I think to really push the management team to get like a cultural mindset about like being open-minded about AI, like trying different tools, testing different tools, not seeing it as a big scary danger that cuts costs and like takes the adopting employees and sometimes like out of their job, but it's really like an opportunity to like grow as an organization and think about cultural impact, like processes, KPIs, management, include the right teams, and just have open dialogue. I think it's more, a lot of times, a cultural macro question to make sure management teams keep a very open-minded approach instead of doing a check the box or tick the box exercises by buying 5 tools and hoping something magical comes out of it.
I think one of the best things a board can do is provide outside perspective. As an operator within a company, often it's easy to get, sort of consumed with everything that's going on, and as much as you might try and network or benchmark or do other things to get an outside perspective, I think the board can be exceptionally useful for that. That has a couple of implications. One, think about board composition, and do I have the right people on the board who can provide those perspectives? And in the public board I'm on, we have a number of people who are specifically, AI, cyber technology, experts, right, who can bring sort of an expert perspective. But more broadly, people who've got a point of view who can, when needed, push the company to say, you're not moving quickly enough, and I know you have a lot of things to do, and I know it's hard and everything else, but I can tell you, you feel like you're making progress, but I sit and look at the rest of the outside world, and I can tell you it's moving faster than you are, or it's moving faster than you think, to kind of give that prompt. And then conversely, to not falsely reassure you, but to give you the perspective. Like, I know there were a number of times at MongoDB where we went to them and kind of called out a problem that we were worried about, and the feedback was, we sit on a lot of boards, we have a lot of vantage point, and it's great that you're worried about that, but you're so much better off than all these other companies. You can like relax a little bit on that topic, but appreciate that you're focused on it, right? So the board can provide that perspective in a way that I think is super helpful.
Well, I know we're at time. Join me in giving a round of applause. Michael, Julian, Sheila, thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom.